Hi, folks. This is Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Materialism. Before I start, I wanted to mention that in about 2.5 hours, I will be recording my first interview podcast, and it will be with Comrade Red Pagan Nicole. I hope that you watch it and comment on it as well. I think it will be a very good interview. Now, let me start. I wanted to address the subject of right and wrong. To me, a focus on right and wrong is a very Western concept, a very first world concept. And I would like to see that we can move beyond the notion of right and wrong. As a critical realist, I would say that our destination could be copresence, meaning that we recognize that we are present with everyone. We are all a part of the same universal substance. We are individuals, we are particulars, and yet there is a universal essence which we are all made out of. When we are born, we are carved out of that universal essence. So a focus on right and wrong assumes that somehow my way of thinking is the best way as opposed to the ideas of other people. How can I possibly know that? I mean, I can say what I think now. I know that I have changed my minds on many subjects over the years, many subjects, especially on the issue of communism and Marxism. Although I have been a communist and Marxist since I was 12, my tendencies have changed like have changed like a thermometer, going up and down like mercury. And so I feel a certain distance from the idea of right and wrong. Do I think I was wrong, for example, when I was a third camp socialist? Do I think I was wrong when I was a left refoundationist Maoist? Do I feel I was wrong when I was an international socialist or whatever? I have been in so many tendencies over the years. No, I don't. Um, I do feel that Maoism, third worldism, is what the world needs. That is how I would express it. Maoism, third worldism is what the world needs right now, because that is where the greatest revolutionary potential lies, in the third world and the fourth world. And so by turning to the third world and the fourth world and learning from them, not expecting them to learn from us, we can, I think, really achieve something positive in this world. So I am opposed, I guess, to attempts to divide the world into dark and light, or right and wrong, or black and white, or whatever. There is no black and white, in my view. Now, I'm not going to say that everything is gray either, because that too, I think, is an error. Saying that there is no right and wrong and saying that there is a gray, to me, is a Western approach, a first world approach to looking at issues, rather than seeing the world as gray, because some issues are pretty stark. Like, for example, the issue of Gaza. I don't see an issue of gray in Gaza. I mean, Gaza needs to be liberated. It needs to be liberated. And the people who are engaging in the conquest of Gaza need to be stopped. How? I have no idea. But putting that into a kind of Manichæan, to use a technical term referring to the Manichæan religion, the kind of Manichæan concept of good and evil is, to me, not an appropriate way of dealing with things. So, yes, I was a Trotskyist twice. I was a third campist, and I was an international socialist. And do I think that I was wrong to be that? No, not at all. I think that they were steps along the way to where I am right now, that I needed those things to be where I am right now. So I would never want to attack third campism or international socialism or even Trotskyism. Never. I would never want to attack anything, because attacking things in a right or wrong world is first worldish. It is very first worldish. It shows a very dualistic approach to things. And I do not want to be dualistic. One translation that Roy Bhaskar made of Maya, or Demireality, was dualism. Dualism, not the same as duality, by the way. Duality is a recognition that we are all distinct individuals. Dualism is the notion that we are all separate individuals, so not at all the same. Dualism is a notion of separation, a notion of splitting. And to me, right and wrong is that. Right and wrong is what Roy Bhaskar refers to as demi-reality. Instead, I think, again, we need copresence. Copresence, I think, is vital for approaching Maoism third worldism. Indeed, I would say it is vital for engagement with the third world and the fourth world. And so that is my view. I realize that my view might in some circles be controversial, but do I care? No. Academics don't care about such things. Academics are generally outspoken. I have seen that over and over again. The more rigid people in anything, especially religions, as a sociologist of religion, I have seen that many, many times. The opponents of those fundamentalists or literalists or dogmatists are generally academics, because we see things from the standpoint of relativity. I am not saying that morality is relative. I am not saying that anything is relative except our own perception of reality. But there is a relativity in the sense of different ideas that are developed by different people. And I think that I need to appreciate that. I need to recognize that I can learn from anyone. They are relative beings. They have their own ideas, which are relative to themselves. And what right do I have to criticize them? So to me, the communist wars, especially the wars between Marxist-Leninists and Trotskyists, are a total waste of time. That does not mean that we should not engage in critique. Critique is important, including self-critique, self-criticism, often called self-crit, which is a common expression used by Marxists. I engage in self-crit all the time. It is part of the reason why I have transcended a particular tendency and have been willing to go from one tendency to another. If I did not engage in self-crit, I might still be a Titoist. But because I have engaged in self-crit, I was willing to move beyond that and go into other tendencies and explore them. At the same time, I can say that even when I was in other tendencies, I was open to a variety of additional ideas. I was never rigid. I was never a fundamentalist. I always had a heart for diversity, I guess you could say. But I generally kept quiet about it. Why? Well, I guess because I knew that by saying what I am saying right now, that I might make enemies. But now, as an academic, as a retired professor, with an emphasis on retired, I no longer care. I know that when I was still working, there was a member of my department, of my sociology department, who was a Maoist. Most of the time I knew him, I was a Trotskyist. What some Marxist-Leninists call a Trotskyite, which is basically kind of an insult. And so I would never use that term Trotskyite except to explain what it is. Why insult anybody? Why not learn from them? Why not find ways of working with them? So I was always willing to work with my colleague who was a Maoist, but he was not willing to work with me. In fact, he spent a great deal of time, whenever I would engage him in conversation, criticizing me for 1 year. For 1 year, based on the fact that I disagreed with him on something related to Marxism, he did not talk with me. He could not stand disagreement. I do not understand how an academic can think that way. Most academics don't, and that's a good thing. Most academics try to look beyond rigidity, factionalism, sectarianism, and toward unity and cooperation. Why? Because we realize that there is no such thing as absolute knowledge. Nobody has absolute knowledge. Knowledge is relative. As in the Jain parable of the blind men and the elephant. One blind man held the tail and thought it was a snake. One held the trunk and thought it was a tree. And so on and so on. In other words, depending upon your perspective, you might think that the elephant is one thing or another. But someone who is not blind would look at the elephant and see it is truly an elephant, not a serpent, a snake, or a tree. So perspectivism is valid, even in the sense that it was discussed by Nietzsche. Nietzsche was a kind of champion of perspectivism as well. Now, I do not use Nietzsche's version of perspectivism. I use Roy Bhaskar's version of perspectivism. Again, Roy Bhaskar was the founder of critical realism, or I should say the English school of critical realism, since actually there are many different critical realisms. But again, going back to the idea of right and wrong, if we realize that our knowledge is relative, that no one can claim to have absolute knowledge of anything, then there is no way that one can justifiably claim to be inerrant or infallible or hostile towards someone with a different view. I remember the story of Louis Pasteur, one of the three founders of germ theory. Yes, one of the three founders. There were actually three people who discovered germ theory at approximately the same time. Simultaneous innovation is a very common event in the sciences, because once knowledge reaches a certain point, many people will begin to recognize the same convergence and will come up with similar ideas. The reason why Pasteur gets credit is because he published his thesis on germ theory first. But really, there were three people, not just one, who should be given credit for germ theory. And no, off the top of my head, I cannot name who those other two people are. But when Louis Pasteur came up with his germ theory, there was a common view that people got sick because of these things called miasma, bad air, bad air. So many people would wear masks so they would avoid breathing in bad air. Many people would dump their waste into the same water that they used to get their drinking water. Why? Because they assumed that if the water did not smell bad, it was okay to drink. In other words, they had no concept of germs. That was a problem. And so once germ theory was accepted by scientists, and over the next couple of generations, when the miasmatic theory gradually was rejected by the general population, the rate of illness dropped precipitously. And understandably, it dropped precipitously because people were now more careful. I mean, to know that there is such a thing as germs makes you realize that whether you know it or not, whether you can smell germs or not, and as far as I know, germs cannot be smelled, they can still harm you. And so germ theory was a life-saving event for many people. And that was a major transformation, which led to all sorts of things, including, for example, the fact that physicians would scrub before surgery, because before then, it was common for physicians to perform surgery without even washing their hands, because they had no idea that they were putting their germs into the body of another human being. Now they understood it, and so scrubbing became commonplace. So again, right and wrong. We need to go beyond that and see knowledge as a learning process, whether with miasmatic theory to germ theory, whether with the different versions of communism or Marxism, or with anything for that matter. Everything can be a learning experience, whether in retrospect it is empirically validated or not, does not necessarily make a particular perspective bad. And so I can see value in some things that Lev Trotsky said, just as I can see considerable value in some things that Joseph Stalin said, and in many things that Mao Zedong said as well. They all made useful contributions. Even the autonomists have made some good contributions, although since I am not a radical individualist, I have never been an autonomist per se, and yet I use a major concept that was developed by autonomists, the empire. That's where the empire, the American empire, came from. It came from autonomism. which was started in Germany and then exported to the US and was taken up by the American New Left. And it was with the New Left, which began in the 50s and ended in the 80s, that autonomism became a school of Marxism and simultaneously a school of anarchism. But first Marxism and then anarchism. So hopefully that is a useful window into my own view of things. Maybe your view of me has deteriorated because of this. Maybe because I do not see things in a rigid way, which I never have. I have always been a very flexible person, always. Because I have turned from one tendency to another does not mean I have become hostile to the previous tendency. Because I have moved from one sociological theory to another does not mean I have become hostile to that earlier sociological theory. In fact, quite the opposite is true. Generally, I take the knowledge I have acquired already and I try to incorporate it into the new perspective I have adopted. For the time being, this has been Mark by Mark A. Foster, Ph.D., for the Institute for Dialectical Materialism. Have a pleasant day and an even better day tomorrow.